Have you ever wondered how banks keep getting rich while you and I struggle with fees and debt? Last year, Canadian banks made $61 billion in profits, and yet millions of Canadians are drowning in debt. By the end of this video, you'll understand the exact strategies that the bank uses to take your money and grow their wealth, and more importantly, how you can beat them at their own game. So let's get started. So in today's video, we'll first be breaking down the revenue sources for the banks. We'll then be talking about the shocking truth about how banks actually create money. And this I got to know back in 2021. And that led me to build a business that is right now Grow with Nav. I'll talk about that in a bit. And then I'll talk about how to beat them and be the bank. And this is no sleazy scheme of infinite banking and buying an insurance policy and being your own bank. I'm not talking about that. We'll be talking about real strategies that are not taking money out of your pocket, but in fact, making you the bank and making you money. We'll talk about that to end the video. First, let's talk about the revenue sources. The easiest one is net interest margins. That basically means that they borrow money at low rates and lend it on a higher rate to you. So it's arbitrage that they're playing with. The simplest example here, and obviously it gets more complicated with banks, but the simplest example here is that your savings account pays you 1%. So you put, let's say, $100,000 in the savings account. That gives you 1.5% depending on the time that we are in. But then they're using that money to lend it out to someone who needs a mortgage at 5%, and the 4% difference is pure profit. That's arbitrage that they're playing. And it's not their money, it's your money, but they're giving it to someone who needs it at a higher interest rate. So that's the number one, biggest source of revenue, one of the biggest sources of revenue. Last year, TD Bank alone, I'm not even talking about all banks taken together, only TD Bank made $16.3 billion in net interest income. That basically $44 million per day of interest income if you look at the spread. The second way of making money is fees, and more fees. You talk about overdraft fee, which is $48 per transaction on average. Then you have monthly account fees. If you have a certain amount, lower than that in your bank account, then you have a $10 to $30 of monthly fee. My bank charges me $17, I think. Then there's credit card annual fees. For fancier the card, the more the fees. And then you have wire transfer fees. And then you have, schemes like, if you do, the first year is free on the credit card, and we'll give you points and everything. And then next year, surprise, there's a $500 renewal fee that you forget that was there, and it just gets charged on your card. All those fees amounted to, if you take all the Canadian banks collectively, they made about $9.2 billion just from fees alone. The third source of revenue is credit card, which is the debt trap. And I'm not talking about credit card fees. That doesn't even scrape the surface. I'm talking about an average Canadian who carries $4,000 of unpaid credit card debt at a 21% interest on average. That basically would amount to, it would take about 23 years to pay if you make minimum payments. And that will amount to $10,000 plus of interest that you would pay on that $4,000 of, the debt that you carry. So this is real numbers, right? So there are so many people who have on average $4,000 in credit card debt, and they're paying 21% interest on that. That's a lot of money that the bank makes. RBC alone made about $4.3 billion from credit card interest. So in the last slide, we saw how all Canadian banks taken together make $9 billion of fees. Here, RBC alone is making $4 plus billion from credit card interest alone. Then we have trading and investment fees. Obviously, the bank is not keeping the money, and we'll talk about, how they actually create money out of thin air. But they are using your money to make more money. They are investing in trades. They are trading in stocks. They are buying bonds. They are buying derivatives, and even cryptocurrencies. Now that we have ETFs, Bitcoin ETFs that were launched in Jan of 2024, there are no true numbers for that, but there's a small portion of the money that is there in the bank accounts are deposits that are actually being invested in cryptocurrencies as well. Scotiabank last year made $6.2 billion from investing and trading, alone, and that's another source of revenue for the banks. And last but not the least, the mortgages and real estate. That's the long game. $2.1 trillion worth of mortgages in Canada, and they are one of the safest sources of, they just love mortgages because banks get a steady payment with interest for 30 years, and the total outstanding mortgage debt in Canada is $2.1 trillion, and it's secured against your home. That's why banks love mortgages, and that's why this kind of income is probably their favorite income. And then you have hidden fees and mortgage penalties, and they make them billions of dollars every single year. Those are the 5 sources of revenue, but that's not it. Banks have the power to create money out of thin air. Let me explain this in the simplest terms possible. Let's say this is me, I go to the bank and put my $1,000 in my savings account or my checking account or wherever, right? So I just put it into my checking account, let's say $1,000. The bank pays me an interest that's separate, 1%, whatever that is. But the bank only has to keep a reserve fund of 10%, which is $100. Now, what I'm trying to explain here is fractional reserve for someone who already understands this, but fractional reserve does not exist in Canada. So this is all theoretical, but let me explain how they are creating money out of thin air. So the $1,000 that I put in the bank account, of that $100 is a reserve fund. They can't touch that. And 900 they can actually lend to another person. Let's say that person is person B. So this is person A, this is person B, and this person B now has $900 that they just borrowed from the bank. So in this example, the simplest example, if now person A, which is me, I go to the bank and say that bank, give me my $1,000, the bank actually does not have that. Because if you look at this example, they only have $100 of my $1,000 and the rest 900 is already lent to someone else that they can't take back because they're already charging an interest. There's already a contract in place. So they don't have that money. And this keeps on happening with the bank. Let's take another example. So let's take the same example, this person B, which has $900, it again puts that $900 into a bank. Obviously, they don't do that. They buy a car or whatever, right? I'll explain that as well. But let's assume that $900 also goes to a bank. Of that, the bank only has to keep $90, and then they can actually lend another $810, which is 90% to person C. Now, of course, this logic is flawed because why would you borrow the $900 and just to keep it in the bank account? That I agree with you. But let's say they borrow the money, $900, to buy an iPhone. This actually makes $900 for Apple, and that $900 actually pays for the infrastructure, it pays for R&D, it pays for salaries, it pays for shareholders, it pays the rent to the mall where the Apple stores are, it pays for a lot of things that Apple does and creates in this world. So yes, the $900 is not going to a bank, but in fact, it's going to an institution that is actually creating more money, more opportunities, more of everything, and that's how money works. And this is all happening from the $1,000 that you deposited, and they only kept $100 in their reserve fund, and they just shipped out the other 900 for you to either keep in the bank again or spend it out there and increase the money supply in the market. Now, this phenomenon is called fractional reserve. What I mean by that is that before 2020 in Canada also and US for the longest time, the banks only had to keep 10% of whatever you deposited. So all of what is deposited, they had to keep 10% of that, and then they can lend out the other 90% to make more money off the money that you deposited. So if you go by this logic of fractional reserve, which is not there, by the way. I'll explain that, what happens now. But that's not there, right now. But the person one, when they deposit $1,000, the reserve is $100 and $900 is lent out. Let's say to person number two, who also deposits that $900 into the bank account and so on and so forth. Overall, there'll be about 78 people, if you just go on and on and on, till this money becomes zero. There'll be about $10,000 of deposits that will be made in the bank account, but the bank only has $1,000 in the bank account. So they just created $9,000 out of thin air. Not just that, they are charging now interest on that $9,000. So this $900 which is lent out, they are paying an interest of $90 here, then the $810, $81. So all of that accounts for about $900, and that's another way of bank making money out of thin air. This $9,000 does not exist. And just, slowly go back and, watch this again if you're not able to understand. But all this is doing is that they are not keeping everything that you put in your bank account. They're only keeping 10% of it and lending out 90% of it. And this is just digital money. It's a line item. There's no money exchange which is happening ever. It's just a line item which is lent out to you. When you buy a car, you don't see the money that comes from the bank as a loan. It's just there. It's a line item. And I'll explain that in a bit, in terms of mortgages as well. But basically, they are making 10%. Let's say that's the interest on average that they're charging on credit cards and everything. They are making a certain amount out of thin air with the money that they do not have, which is exactly what bank run is. And that's what happened with Silicon Valley Bank. A lot of banks in the past as well. There are over 2,000 banks that have failed because of a bank run. So let's take an example of TD. And if you're banking with TD, and if you have, let's say, $50,000 in that bank account, if everyone who's banking with TD all at once go and take their money out of TD will go down. Obviously, they'll be bailed out. They're a big bank, everything, right? But they will go down because they do not have all that money. They're not keeping all your deposits. They have lent it out in investments. They have lent it out on, like on mortgages. They have lent out that money that they did not have because it was your money. Obviously, it's insured, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But that's what a bank run is, and that's the biggest reason why banks collapse. The regulations in Canada are a lot stricter. Therefore, you don't see a lot of bank runs happening, in Canada. But in US, it's really very common, which is exactly what happened in 2008 as well during the subprime crisis. Since 2020, March of 2020, when COVID hit, they actually don't have to keep any fractional reserve. So basically that means theoretically they can actually lend out 100% of the money that you have in the bank account. But they are, obviously it's Canada, there is regulation around that, and there are rules around capital adequacy and liquidity coverage. I'll not explain this in detail, but I'll explain one term which is easier to understand, liquidity coverage, so that you understand how it works. In 2023, RBC had total deposits of $1.9 trillion. So that's all the money that's there, that's our money that we have kept in the bank account. RBC's liquid assets were $345 billion. So if everyone goes to RBC and takes out the money, they don't have enough to cover. So $345 billion is all they have. But because of their history, of banking, and they know how much money goes out every single day out of their bank, whether it's bad debt, whether it's bad credit, whether it's a mortgage that has to go out, or it's a bank run, an individual bank run where I have to take out money, all of the money that I have. Overall, their 30-day net outflow of cash is $275 billion. So in the next 30 days, if the worst is to happen, as per their data, $275 billion is the net cash outflow that can happen, worst case scenario. That basically means that as per the OSFI, which is the regulatory body, the liquidity rule says that LCR, which is liquidity coverage ratio, should be liquid assets, which is 345 billion, divided by 275 billion, should be over 100%. So this number that you have, liquid assets, should be more than what the worst case scenario of outflow is. Now, obviously, the worst case scenario is $1.9 trillion, but that doesn't happen, right? So it's not practical. So they have to keep over 100% in liquid assets of their 30-day net cash outflow. And in this case, they are compliant because they are at 125%. Now, keeping this in mind, the reason why banks love mortgages and why RBC and all these top 5 banks fight on interest rates, even though their margins are very thin for the mortgages, because it is the safest way to create money. And the reason is that, yes, it's a fact that they don't have the money that they lent you. Now, the $800,000 mortgage that you have, that's not, did you see that money? Did you see the $800,000? No, right? That's just a line item. That's just digital money. That's just a ledger. It is not real money that is exchanging hands. It's just a line item that has been created. And what happens is that you are paying off that line item. Because you're paying, a mortgage every single month, that is part principal, part interest. The principal pays off that digital ledger that they created every single month for 30 years. And you pay an interest on top of it, which goes into their profitability. That's how. Those are facts, right? So, I don't know if I was very surprised in 2021 when I got to know that the mortgage that I'm getting, that's just a ledger. There's no real money, that they are lending out. Anyways, it's more complicated than that. Now, obviously, interest is amazing, but the biggest reason why the banks love this is because it's the safest way of creating money. And the reason is because if you default, they sell the home and recover the money. And let's say they are not able to recover the entirety of the money. Sometimes, if you bought at the peak of the market, a lot of people are selling at a loss. The banks are taking away homes and they're selling at a loss. Let's say you have a $200,000, $100,000 difference and you still owe the bank because the house is not worth what you owe to the bank. They still have different ways. They don't necessarily have to put it as a loss. They can because the default rate is only 0.17% in Canada, but they have mortgage-backed security. So they sometimes actually sell these mortgages to investors like pension funds because it's such a safe asset and they don't require a crazy amount of growth in pension funds. They do sell these mortgages as securities to these investors, and sometimes they also are insured mortgages. If you do a less than 20% down, you pay something called as a mortgage insurance that goes out of your pocket, and that helps pay the bank as an insurance from CMHC if there's a shortfall when they sell the home. And that's one of the biggest reasons why banks don't shy away from giving you a mortgage, but they do shy away in giving you unsecured line of credits, credit cards. The credit card limits are lower, and the reason is that those are all unsecured loans, the credit cards and the line of credits. However, this is very secured against the asset, and the bank has the first dibs on your home if you're not able to pay your mortgage. But the question is, can they still go down? Can TD, RBC, all these big banks go down? And the answer is yes. If there's a bank run that happens, if something massive happens in the economy, it can go down. Now, there are only two such instances that this has happened. One is the Home Bank of Canada collapse in 1923, and the other one is more recent. This is a Edmonton-based bank, CCB, which is Canadian Commercial Bank. Now, I'll talk about the CCB because 1923 was a long time ago. There were no such regulations, but 1985 is fairly recent, I would say. And what happened in case of CCB is that they were lending out money, too much money, and it's in Edmonton, so they were lending out too much money to oil and natural gas companies, and those oil and natural gas companies defaulted on their loans, and therefore the people actually lost trust in this bank and they went for a bank run. They were defaulting on the loans, so that was another loss that they had to take, and they just collapsed completely. And that was probably the biggest collapse that Canada has seen more recently, and it's still 1985, and then the regulations became stricter, and right now we only see 5 or 6 banks. That's one of the reasons why we have such a less number of banks. There are over 2,000 banks in US. We only have about 6 banks controlling 90% of the market in Canada. Now, whether it's good or bad, we don't know. That's probably one of the reasons why fees are so high in Canada. Said that, anything can happen. It happened in 1985 when no one thought it would happen, but you never know. It's a very unstable economy that we have. But what happens if to your money if the bank collapse? Right now, I don't know what happened in 1985, but right now your money is secured by CDIC, Canada Deposit Insurance Corporation, and it insures deposits of up to $100,000. So yeah, your money is insured if you are keeping in the bank account, and even if the bank goes down, you will still get money in days, not months or years. If a major bank faced an insolvency like a TD or an RBC, Bank of Canada would step in and create that emergency liquidity. I don't think big banks are just too big to fail, and even if they fail, the banks would bail them out. And of course, we are in 2025, and therefore there are regulations in place that do require banks to maintain high capital reserves. Like we saw, RBC has about $345 billion in reserves, and their cash outflow at the worst case is $275 billion. So they have enough to cover that. But if there's a massive bank run that happens for any reason, economic or I don't know why it would happen, but if it was to happen, I'm pretty sure our money will be saved. But again, the insurance only covers for about $100,000 of liquidity. So the question is, how do we beat the bank? And there are two types of strategies that I'll talk about. One is level 1 strategies. I just call that level 1 strategies, but that's hate the banks. The number one is that, and I'll tell you why I say that. The first one is keep one credit card with a low or a $0 annual fees and pay off on time and in full. Don't keep, this is not hate the banks. This is just common sense. This is just good financing, personal finance. Just don't have unlimited number of credit cards just for points and everything, and just pay it off on time and in full, and don't keep a balance. That way you don't make the credit card companies rich. The second one is don't borrow to buy stupid stuff. Again, normal stuff, one of the things, obviously, cars comes to mind when I talk about this, but I'm not even talking about cars. I see a lot of people over leveraging themselves and using line of credits to buy properties. That's not the best use of your line of credit. You are actually borrowing on a very expensive, you're borrowing pretty expensive. The borrowing on the line of credit is sometimes, at as high as 9-10%. And just to put a deposit on a property that will probably cash flow. And in Canada, that's difficult, especially if you include the cost of paying the interest on the line of credit. I just don't feel it's a good way of using your line of credit and borrowing to buy a property, and I would say that's also really stupid. Invest. Everything except your emergency fund should be invested. That's something that I really truly believe in, and I think everyone should be investing everything apart from their emergency fund, unless of course you are saving for a big purchase like a house. Then obviously you need to keep that in a high interest savings account. Use online banks to save money. They give better interest rates anyways, and they don't have any unnecessary fees. I used to use EQ Bank a lot when I was working. Right now I'm using EQ Bank still, but I also use Wealthsimple. Wealthsimple is not technically a bank, but somewhat it is, but they don't have any crazy fees associated with their accounts, and it serves the money, and it's still CDIC secured, so insured, so I'm all good. Do not keep over $100,000 in one bank, because CDIC protection says that if you have over $100,000, you might not get anything which is over $100,000. So make sure that you are spreading your risk if you have more money than $100,000 into multiple banks, and pay off your primary home early. So I'd like to explain that with an example. How do you pay off and why do you pay off your house early? That's something that is part of my retirement plan when I build the roadmap for my clients. When you get into Grow Nation, I do this calculation for every single client of mine, and it's really important that you build a strategy around that. Let's say your original amount is $875,000. Let's say your first payment is today, which is at the time of shooting this video. 25 years of loan, that's what you took, not 30 years, and let's say 4% interest. I'm just taking hypothetical numbers. You can actually change that. I'll link that in the description. And let's say, let me just go back. That basically means that you'll be paying a total interest of $510,000 over the course of 25 years. That's a lot of money. When I said that the bank is actually creating a ledger. They have not really lent you $875,000. They're just creating that ledger. That's because in 25 years, you'll make them $500,000 richer by paying that in interest. Plus, you'll also be paying the $875,000 of principal. So that ledger goes away. The fake money that they created, or the imaginary money that they created, that goes away, and they still are $500,000 richer on just your house. That's one of the reasons why I really want to pay off my house earlier. Let's say you make one additional payment, let's say $5,000 every single year on the anniversary date of your mortgage, and that way you'll be saving, out of the $500,000, you'll be saving almost $71,000 of interest. Now, I personally would want to do about $15,000, so 3 payments, every single year, and that would put my interest savings to about $165,000. So instead of paying $510,000, I would be paying $344,000. That's something that I can live with. I'll be mortgage free 7 years early, and that's something that I recommend every one of my clients to do. At least pay one mortgage payment every single year. More if you are able to afford more, because you would want a mortgage and a rent-free retirement. That's one of the major reasons why you buy a primary home. Now, obviously, I'm trying to hate on the bank here because that's what the title says. But yeah, it's just common sense to pay off your mortgage early, and that's always part of the plan when we buy a home for any of our clients. Now, let's talk about a little bit more advanced strategy where you can actually buy a cash flowing property using debt. Now, I understand that I'm a mortgage agent and you must feel that, oh, I have to make you buy a property so that I make money. Still hear me out till the end of the slide, because I'm going to give you something that does not make me money, and I'll give you my personal reason of why I'm not doing this. But let's talk about this. So this is a property that I am, this is not the exact property. So I'm already in contract on this property, so I can't technically put the actual picture. But it's a fairly new property. This is not in Canada. This is in Ohio. It's a duplex, 2 units, 3 bed, 2 bath per unit. So it's 6 bed. 4 bath. You can, it's similar property. So, you'll have 2 doors side by side, not, up and down, but it's side by side. Identical units, and they're fully furnished in the sense that I don't have to spend anything, maybe $5,000-7,000 of repairs. But other than that, it's a fairly new property in a really good area of Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio. The list price is $209,000. Now, this property on a good day is worth about $250-260 at the minimum. But it's listed at $209,000 because it's a foreclosure. So it's not a property which is, seller is in distress right now, and it's with the bank. The down payment which is required, for me to put is about 35% because I'm a foreign buyer in the US. So $73,000 and $7,000 in closing costs is also very high because I'm a foreign buyer. The loan amount would be obviously mathematically $135,000 and change, and I'll get an 8.5% interest rate for 30 years. That's also because I'm a foreign buyer and therefore I'll have to go private. The mortgage payment on this house will be $1,030, so not a lot, but there will be other expenses like property taxes, property management, because I can't go to Cleveland every single time there's something wrong with, happens with the house. This is maintenance and repairs. This is $150. I've just taken, 5% or something, there. I've taken a 5% vacancy. I've taken insurance at $190, and the total expenses come to about $2,040. This includes a mortgage payment. So $1,000 of expenses and $1,000 of mortgage comes to about $2,040 of total expenses. And I've included every single expense that can be there. And the rent for each unit is $1,350. Now, Ohio is not a very affluent state, and even though this is one of the best neighborhoods, the rents are not very high. It's not as crazy as Canada. So the rent per unit is $1,350. Tenants are already paying for the last 3 years, and they are good tenants. That's what we have been told. We'll have to do our due diligence here. But $2,700 is the total rent, and I'll be making $700 in profit or net margins every single month. The reason why I say that you do this is because now you're using debt to do something really good for yourself. Not only is this 8.5% interest and every single cost and the principal amount is being paid by the tenant, I'm also getting cash flow from this asset, and the asset actually is increasing in value, so I can actually sell it at a profit or not, right? Or just, keep taking the cash flow, make it mortgage free in about 20-30 years, and live off that money, the net operating income, and fund my retirement with it. Now, this is a really good investment, right? $209,000. We have actually put an offer of $189,000 on this one. So this crazy low balling this property because it's in foreclosure, but probably will not get it. But, this is a crazy deal. And these are the kind of deals that if you are able to make, and you can't make that in Canada, that's why I'm a huge propagator of buying a primary home here, but not being emotional about buying your investment property in Canada. I'm not in favor of that. But a lot of people want that, and that's why I look at Calgary to do it, because the closing costs are lower and the cash flow is much higher. But yeah, those are the kind of properties that I look at every single day. And I am, in fact, even though I've put an offer on this one, if I don't get it, I'll not fret about it. I'll not sweat about it, because I'm going to sell everything except my primary home, because I'm not doubling down on real estate right now, because there's a better way of making money. And this is something that I learned, not too long ago. But if you look at this particular example, where the $1,000 that I put in the bank, and they took a reserve fund, and then they lent $900 to someone else, and then $900, goes to a bank. The entire, money creation that the bank is doing, I want to be here. I want to build a product that can actually make me the person who this person spends the $900 on. That's the reason why you see entrepreneurs, and that's the reason why there's a craze for entrepreneurship. The reason is that instead of being this guy, we actually get to be this guy. And that's just higher up in the food chain, where the $900 is not going to a bank, but the $900 is being spent on something that is of value to them. But it's spent on something, and that something is created by an entrepreneur like me. That's where I'm doubling down on, because now I kind of get to be the bank, or someone who actually gets the wealth or the fake money which is being created by the bank. I'll give you 4 examples here. These are all people that I use. This is a like a car detailing company that I use for if I want mobile cleaning in my office, I just call them. They started this company in 2020 with this car that they bought on credit. So they borrowed from the bank to buy this car and then wrap it around. And then they, because it was 2020, people could not go to detailing shops to get their cars cleaned. So they called the car cleaning company, which is this, came to our house and then cleaned the cars, and they charged $40-50 an hour to do that, and then they increased price, and then they doubled down, and now they have 4 or 5 different franchisees of this normal franchisees, just this car that is making them $20-30 an hour, and they also have a detailing shop now, so they were able to use the profits and buy a detailing shop, and obviously they use again debt, but they're making a lot more than what that debt is being serviced at. So that's one company that I use that have done that. This is another company 2 years ago. His name is Aman. I don't know if he's watching the video. He does watch my videos as well, but this guy actually bought a like a van, and he started changing tires, and now he's actually buying or renting, not buying but renting a shop in Kitchener or Waterloo for and starting a car detailing, full-fledged car detailing business. Again, another example of how you use debt to create a product that people can buy and give that fake created money by the bank. You get that instead of another bank or another company getting that. AMW Pest Control, they are not very, 1 year ago they started the business. They are doing really well, and again, similar story, and I use that company. Again, my handyman who is also doing my snow shoveling, so he normally shovels snow for me. I've been using him for the last 2 years full time, and 3 years ago also I used him a little bit in Kitchener, but this guy doesn't even have a website, and he earns about $250,000 in net profit running a business of snow shoveling and landscaping and some handyman services. All these people are not Apple, but they are people who are getting a slice of this $900, and not being this person only who is just paying that $900 to buy something. And that's one of the reasons why I say that real estate is the second fastest way to become wealthy. In fact, it is one of the fastest way to become broke as well. But the fastest way to create a lot of wealth for yourself, generational wealth for yourself, is starting companies like these who are higher up in the chain, and they are the ones who are taking a slice of the money that is being created in the economy. Which is exactly why I'm doubling down on my business, and I started doing Grow Nation startup boot camps, 50 aspiring entrepreneurs. This happened yesterday. The first one happened yesterday, and the second one I'll just gonna tell you when it's gonna happen. And they met in person, and we launched our first business from idea to execution. We understood the viability of the product and what's the go-to-market strategy. We did all of that in that entire day, and I'm pretty confident that there'll be at least 5 to 10 companies that would come out of this one boot camp. At least I could sense that in the environment. The next one is happening on March of 29th, and in order to join this bootcamp, you'll just have to scan this QR code, or you just go to the description and subscribe to my newsletter, because that's where I launch these bootcamps. So just either subscribe, use the QR code, or go to the description and subscribe to the newsletter so that you do not miss the slots for this particular bootcamp. This will actually be launched in less than a week now. And my vision with this bootcamp, I don't know where this takes me, but I want to enable 1,000 new businesses in the next 40 years, and maybe even invest in a few of these businesses and grow these businesses together with the founders. But that's something for the future. That's all I have for today. मिलते हैं अगली वीडियो में, तब तक के लिए bye bye.